I've often seen people say how visual novels, in particular the bishoujo scene, has been dying for the past few years, or how its golden age is long gone. And while there is some truth to that, as barely any new VNs are getting anime adaptations, and a few developers have jumped ship into mobile territory, there are still plenty of great games being developed in this genre. So we have compiled a list of 20 highly acclaimed visual novels that have been released in Japan in the past 3 years. Honestly, we could have made this list way larger, but we decided to keep it one title per developer. It's possible that you might have already heard of some of these, but we've also tried to include a couple of lesser known ones so that you can expand your never-ending VNDB wishlist just a little bit more, and who knows, perhaps find a new one to pester your favorite localizing company to translate and release here in the West. Let's start this list with an obvious pick, Tsukihime, A Piece of Bluegrass Moon. This is the first part of the long-anticipated Tsukihime remake covering Akreide and Ciel's roots. Quite a few were surprised by how much has been changed from the original, with new characters being introduced and Ciel's route being basically completely redone from the ground up, which consequently made this game double the length of the original, despite only including half of the game's roots. But regardless, it ended up being yet another hit in Type Moon's long-running visual novel history, and we cannot wait to see what the second part, titled The Other Side of the Red Garden, will bring to the table. Here's hoping that Best Girl Sachin finally gets the justice she deserves. Cabbage Soft is a relatively new developer who released their first VN back in 2017. Here in the West, they might be better known for Amairo Chocolata, their only title that has so far received an English translation. But it seems like their latest game, Jewelry Hearts Academia, has been their finest work so far. It's a story about a spy that infiltrates a school whose students have some sort of superpower which are a reflection of their own inner wishes and desires. The game is highly praised for its swift pacing and great use of foreshadowing. It's overall considered one of the best visual novels released this year. Monkeys exclamation mark plus inverted exclamation mark is the latest title by developer Harukaze. And yes, I know that's probably not how you meant to read the title, but inverted exclamation mark should go before the word or sentence, not after it. Anyways, in this game you play as the leader of a group of good-for-nothing delinquents that has to cross-dress in order to attend a high-class all-girls school to avoid his actual school becoming a parking lot. It's a story full of witty comedy, greatly elevated by its sharp presentation and clean art style. Although if anything, the game is well worth playing simply to hear the incredibly talented voice actress Tanizaki Atsumi acting as a tomboy. An official English translation for Monkeys was announced by Harukaze themselves, but there hasn't been any updates about it ever since. Saga Planets is one of the most renowned, currently active Moege developers, probably better known for Kin'iro Livrish, and their latest game, Ambitious Mission, seems to be yet another strong title for them. This one goes for a phantom thief-like premise with a nice balance between comedy and romance. As far as an English translation, I'm willing to bet Nekonayan will eventually pick this one up, considering that Kin'iro Livrish did fairly well for them. Now for this next one, we definitely can't show any footage, otherwise YouTube would nuke our channel out of existence in the blink of an eye. So here are some royalty-free pictures of doggies. Nevertheless, we thought we might as well add at least one Nukige to our list, and which better one than the Moto Haramase games. These are no-frills Nukige with barely anything resembling a narrative but extremely high productions and a great sense of humor. Developed by Milk Factory, formerly Squeeze, sometimes you just gotta love Nukige developer names. There are currently 3 of these games, although they are more or less meant to be the spiritual follow-up to the Hono no Haramase series. Also, if you thought the DuckTales theme was catchy, just wait until you hear this, the theme of Ero Apri Gakuen. You won't be able to get it out of your head for a while. The first one is already available in English on Steam under the name Oppai Academy, so it's perfectly possible that the other 2 will get localized as well. If you asked me to make a list with the most underappreciated visual novel developers, I'm sure I would put Liarsoft right on the top of it. Maiden, their latest title, is a Yuri visual novel with a mystery horror theme to it. The story takes place in an otherworldly all-girls school that's hiding a dark secret behind its doors. One thing Liarsoft is particularly good at is the way they manage to capture the characters' personalities and their state of mind using precise and delicate prose, which further elevates their charm and depth. That, alongside the truly striking and beautiful art style, makes this title a fine read for those looking for more profound stories in their VNs. Released back in late 2020, Tsui no Sora Remake is the complete remake of scenario writer Tsukagi's debut visual novel. The original game was released in 1999 and was the first title in what would eventually be called the Three Big Denpa titles, which were visual novels heavily inspired by Leaf's Shizuku. However, the original Tsui no Sora, as influential as it might have been, has certainly not aged gracefully, but this remake properly expands that story into something worthy of its pedigree. This is a psychological horror and visual novel that delves deep into some philosophical themes. If you've already played Tsukihime, localized as Wonderful Every Day, you might have an idea of what to expect, as both titles are relatively similar and equally excellent. Let's also not forget about Sakutoki, which unfortunately was delayed to early 2023, but hey, at least it's finally coming out after all these years. Moyu is the highest rated visual novel released in recent years. Developed by Favorite, this one is a fairy tale like story with a mahou shoujo premise. While the game had some pacing issues, probably due to its somewhat tedious prose and absurd length, it still manages to be a heartfelt story that delivers an earnest message. There have already been some Favorite visual novels being picked up by different localization companies, so one can assume that this one will eventually come out in the West too. Black Sheep Town is the latest VN written by Setoguchi, better known for other VNs such as Musicus. By when this was announced, the game was shrouded in mystery, with very little being revealed other than its release date. But now it's finally here. It has been received with almost universal acclaim, some considering it to be his best work yet. It's a story about humanity, exploring deep themes regarding life and death, which probably doesn't tell you much, but this is the type of VN that you would want to go in fully blind. Regardless, it's always reassuring to know that great writers such as Setoguchi are still working in this industry. Hopefully his next work, Hira Hira Huru Huru, will be coming out next year and becomes another strong title of his. Tsukikana is the most recent main release from Tone Works, better known in English spheres for Hoshiori. This one starts off as a fairly run-of-the-mill high school VN, but once you finish the first part of the common route, the story jumps a few years into the future when the protagonist is already a working adult. It is then when you're thrown into a loop with a really interesting and unique plot twist, which more or less connects those two chapters in an unexpected narrative way. It's certainly one of those VNs where there's a lot more going on than it might seem at first. As of right now, none of Tone's Works titles have been officially translated, but not so long ago a fan translation for this one was announced, although it seems it's still in its earlier stages. Tsui no Stella is the latest work by VN developer Ki, written by Romeo, who's better known for other VNs such as Cross Channel and Saihate no Ima. This isn't the first time he's worked with Ki, since he also wrote some of the routes for Rewrite. As for Tsui no Stella, just like Loopers and Planetarian, it's a kinetic VN with a post-apocalyptic science fiction setting where machines now rule above humanity. The story itself is about finding out what it means to be human from the point of view of a young AI robot girl who is slowly learning about the world. With fantastic artwork, well-written prose, and a nicely developed premise, this one marks another stellar entry in Ki's catalogue. Get it? Because it's Tsui no Stella. Stella! It's a great pun and you know it. Anyways, we do believe the chances of this one being officially localized are rather high, since Ki has a pretty good track record for it. And worst case scenario, apparently there's already an unofficial translation going on, so sooner or later you will be able to read this one. That being said, as far as official releases, it's likely that Lunaria will get an English release first, but that's another great visual novel, so we can't really complain. We might actually cover both of these two eventually if we have the time and there's enough interest in them. This next one doesn't seem to have an abbreviated title, so we're just going to use its subtitle. Crate Girls Started to Walk is I Know Link's debut title, released in late 2021. The story is about a novelist who's now suffering from writer's block. The game places a strong emphasis on how your personal experience directly influences your own nature, drawing parallels between yourself and your creative inclinations. While the protagonist and its behaviour can be at times hard to sympathise with, this is a really solid title for those wanting a plot with sincere drama. Yukiiro Sign is a winter-themed visual novel developed by Wonderful and released in March 2021. You might actually recognise the art style as it was made by Umiko, who also worked on anime such as The Aquatope on White Sand and the multimedia franchise Lapis Relights. The general theme of the plot is about enjoying your youth while you can. It might not be the type of VN that tries to revolutionize the genre, but instead focuses on making a really solid and enjoyable character-focused story. Another visual novel with the same artist as the last one is Aonatsu Line, developed by Giga. This one is a fairly vanilla and wholesome experience with a really great overall presentation. The highlight of this title, however, is the route from the main heroine Meikei. It's a wonderful take on the classic childhood friend trope that manages to go well beyond expectations, with fantastic character development between her and the main protagonist. A fan translation for it is in the works some months ago, but the team is running into some technical issues with the game engine, which postponed the translation indefinitely. It would be a shame if nothing came out of it. On a brighter note, an official Chinese translation was announced recently, which could potentially mean an English one is in the works. Fingers crossed it eventually happens. Girls Bookmaker is the first game developed and released by Yumemiru, which saw release back in mid-2019. It's a laid-back fantasy-themed isekai story where all the main characters are based on literature figures, such as Goth, Anderson, Alice. There's even a big booby version of Lovecraft. The individual plot arcs of the characters are on the shallower side of things, but the heroines are charming enough to make it an enjoyable read. It's hard to tell whether it will get an English release, but I believe the possibility that Shirobune might pick it up is there, as both of them and Yumemiru are subsidiaries of DMM Games. We'll have to see. Meikei no Lupercalia is a character-focused VN with a theatrical theme, which is something not common in the genre. As one would expect from a game with such a premise, the voice acting of this one is simply top-notch, perhaps some of the best you will hear in a VN. It's a story with extremely solid character development, where even the sub-characters are properly given the spotlight to better flesh out their personalities. Right now it doesn't seem like any group, neither fan-based or official, has picked this one up for translation, but considering the great acclaim it received and its popularity, it's most likely going to end up happening at some point or another. Amakano 2 is a sweet romantic autumn-themed VN developed by Azarashi Soft, and romance is probably the best word to describe this one because it has it in spades. Even during the common route, which is the part often reserved for friendship, you'll get a good deal of sugary scenes, and that's without mentioning the great artwork and fantastic CGs. If you want a dose of diabetes injected right into your veins, you'll certainly enjoy Amakano 2. Regarding an English release though, as of right now, the only Azarashi Soft games that have been translated has been Aikagi, localized by Front Wing, so who knows, maybe they will work on this one or not, or it's prequel, we don't know. To You Like a Goddess is a science fiction VN set in a world where almost everything is dependent on a fully sentient AI. The story is about a hacker who one day, after feeling discouraged with his love life, meets a robot with the appearance of a young girl who precisely matches his preference to a T. That robot immediately loves him greatly, but she being an AI meant that in some places she lacked the common sense a human would have. The game deals with its sci-fi themes quite nicely while still giving the characters enough attention to emphasize their charm. This one was developed by Cube, who unfortunately no of the titles of theirs have been translated so far. The chances for an English release aren't that high, but we will see. If you're into galgame, you probably already heard or probably even played a visual novel called Magikoi alongside its many fan discs. Well, the developer Minato Soft seemed like they were ready to move on to their next big project with Waga, a medieval fantasy VN released back in 2021. This one is yet another extremely enjoyable title with a light-hearted tone to it. Plenty of comedy, plenty of adventures, and plenty of endearing characters. This one will certainly satisfy fans of this developer. Unfortunately, Magikoi's Western release sales numbers were notoriously low, so the likelihood of this game receiving an official translation is rather low. It might eventually get picked up by a fan translation group, though considering its length, that too might end up being a rather long wait. The Kara no Shoujo series is a highly acclaimed noir saga of VNs developed by Innocent Grey, with the last and final entry being released a couple of years ago, late 2020. This one is once again a quality murder mystery VN excelling in its character depth, particularly in its protagonist, and its atmosphere. That being said, a few expressed some disappointment in how some narrative plot threads were resolved, while others felt it was a great conclusion to the franchise. It might have ended up being a slightly divisive final entry, but for those with whom it resonated, it certainly lived up to the wait. We have zero doubts that Manga Gamer will eventually release it here in the West, since they are the ones in charge of the series. It's just a matter of time. And lastly, the final game we will be talking about is the latest game in Kyurupo's catalog, Henpri. We are going to avoid saying its full name to avoid any possible troubles with YouTube, but this is yet another great title developed by this relatively new face in the industry. Kyurupo has only created 3 VNs so far, yet in this short period of time they've quickly become one of the strongest VN developers out there with an incredibly loyal following. Henpri especially received an overwhelmingly positive reception, many going as far to call it one of the greatest VNs of all time. What sets their titles apart from others is how fresh they feel with their general approach to the themes commonly seen in this genre. Henpri is yet another masterpiece under their belt, and one that sharply touches on topics such as the faults of the current legal system, political corruption, and even sexual identity. Unfortunately, the only game of theirs that was going to receive an English translation was their first game, but Seoul Press, the localization that was working on it, went under, so now it's uncertain if anyone will pick up any of their titles. But at the very least, one can assume that Kyurupo is interested in releasing their games overseas. And there you have it, 20 recently released VNs that are well worth your time. Thank you, Miguel Marin, for writing this and giving me a very nice challenge with this. Oh my god, the pronunciation. I always love that challenge. Have you played any of these before? Would you like to read them in the future if they are translated into English? Let us know in the comments. Please subscribe. Yes.